Hello everyone, welcome to this video. In this video, I want to focus on data frames and let's spend some time trying to understand the data frames structures from pandas. For the purpose of this demonstration, what I have done is that I have created a dictionary here. You should be familiar with the dictionaries from your prerequisite course on Python. And what this dictionary contains is basically names of different students and their marks on the 3 tests that they had given. And I'm going to use this dictionary to initialize a data frame structure in this example. So let's do that. And I'm going to put this in a variable called grades. And this data frame will basically, it can be initialized by calling in the data frame function from pandas, and I'm going to assign this dictionary as input. And let's see what the grades look like at this point. So as you can see, this data frame is a two-dimensional structure, and you can generally think of data frames as enhanced two-dimensional arrays. And these are called enhanced arrays because of the multiple features which are specific to data frames. Okay, one of them being that you can customize their indices. Another one is that data frames can also hold missing information. Okay, and we are going to be discussing that later on, but let's just continue on understanding some basic concepts about data frames at the moment. So what I'm going to do next is that I'm going to try and customize the names of the rows in this particular data frame. Okay, and the way to do that, there are many ways of doing that. I'm going to show you one of the ways to do that. What we could have done in the first place is that when we were initializing this data frame, we could have, what I could have said is, I could have said index is equal to and given a list of names, okay, strings which would basically act as indices for this particular exercise. Okay, and let's try and print the grades at this point in time. And as you can see, the rows have been assigned a custom index. Okay, just do this one more time. The grades have been assigned a custom index. And now it's very clear, you can see that each row represents a particular test. Okay, so now what I want to show you next is basically how do you access the different elements in a data frame. So first we will start by retrieving a particular column, and then I'll show you how to get back rows. Okay, so let's say that we wanted to get the grades for Eva, and how would we do that? Okay, so the way to do it is pretty simple. You can just give the column name next to the grades, and you will see that you can get back the particular column that you were interested in. Okay, now let's try to get the rows back. And in order to get the rows from a data frame, there are two attributes of data frames that are specially optimized for accessing the different elements of this two-dimensional array. And those two attributes are basically loc and iloc. So let's discuss them each one by one. So we will start by taking a look at the loc attribute. So let's try to use that first, and then we will look at the output to see what happened. Okay, and let me show you an example of how to use loc. So as you see here, what happened is that I gave a particular label as input to the loc attribute. And when I said test 1, if you go back to your initial data, it has given me this whole row which corresponds to test 1. Okay, so that's how you can use the loc attribute. Now, let's see an example of using the iloc attribute, and then we will compare the two attributes. So here what I would do is I'm going to give the row index instead of the row index as an integer instead of the row index as a label. And here we are. Okay, so let's say if we were interested in getting the same column back, I'm going to say iloc index equal to 0. Okay, and that gives me the same information. So if you really look at the two attributes, the main difference is that loc is used with indices as labels, and iloc is used when the indices are being used as integers. Okay, and that is why the alphabet I in front of the iloc attribute. Okay, so once that is done, so now you know how to access a particular column, and you know how to access a given row from a data frame. Now let's try to select rows via using the slicing feature on loc and iloc attributes. So let's see what I mean by that. Okay, so let's see an example here first. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to use the loc feature, and I'm going to show you how we can use that for slicing our data. Okay. So what this really did is that it gave me the whole data set back. Okay, and I could have maybe, let's say, if you only wanted for test 1 and test 2, then you can get a subset of in terms of the rows that you were looking to retrieve. So this is known as the slicing feature for loc. Now let's try some slicing using iloc. Okay, and the way to do that would be that, let's say I wanted to get the same data back. I'm going to use the iloc feature, and I'm going to say 0:2. Okay, and what that gave me is the same set of information. So one thing to note is that when you're slicing using iloc, the high index is not included. So if you go back to our original data, and if you see the indices that we had in our original data, index 0 and index 1 corresponds to test 1 and test 2. So when I use the slicing feature using iloc and I said 0:2, basically all I got back was one index less than the highest index that I had used, which is essentially test 1 and test 2 rows. Okay, so this is something to keep in mind when you're using the slicing feature of iloc. Okay, and let's try a few more things now. Okay, now let's say if you wanted to get a subset of a few rows and few columns at the same time, so what could you do for that? So let's first try and use the loc feature for doing that, and then we are going to do the same thing using the iloc feature. Okay, so let's say you wanted to, sorry, let's say we wanted to use test 2, and going to use the slicing feature here, and for the second parameter I want to give a list of a few names of students whose grades that I'm interested in. So let's say we are only interested in getting the grades for Eva and Katie for test 1 and test 2. So essentially, if I go back here, what I want is for Eva and for Katie, these two columns, and I don't want the 3 rows, but I only want the top 2 rows. So in that case, here's the function, here's the code that I need to write for that, and let's see what we will get at the end of it. So as you can see, I have used a slicing feature for the rows, and I have give it a list of columns that I am interested in with loc, and that gives me the correct set of results. Now let's try to do this same thing using iloc and see how that works. So I'm going to use iloc in order to get the same output, and one way to do that is basically you could use a list for the rows, and you could use a slicing feature on the columns. Okay, and sorry, this is going to give me a different output. So to do the same thing, I would say 0:2, and I'm going to give a list of the names for Eva, which is 1, and Katie, which is 3. So I'm going to say 1, comma 3, and I'm going to close my. Okay, so here we are. So there are many ways of doing this. What I just did is that I gave a slicing function as the first parameter on the rows because I want to test 1 and test 2, and we know that the high index is not included, so that's why I got the rows based on index 0 and index 1, and I had to go back to the initial data set and see that what are the indices corresponding to Eva and Katie, which was 1 and 3. So here's how I could get the same data back using the iloc feature. Okay, so that's all I have for this video, and this is only the beginning. A lot of times in reality, when we will be using data frames to read in our text files and other types of files, obviously you will not be creating the data by yourself, but the data will be read in from the files. But a lot of these slicing features will be very, very useful because often we want to work on a subset of the data set when we are working in analytics. Okay, so look forward to a lot more learning as we go on in this course. Happy learning.